Okay, good to go. Okay, welcome to our weather discussion today. Fairly limited population today. Some of the reasons Michael's away, that's always brings some excitement to the discussion. And some reasons for he and I to argue. I miss that every time he's away. So maybe Greg and I will argue about something.
Yeah, it's almost we'll argue.
Yeah. So Pete's showing us, I didn't get to see this, so I'm really glad to see it. Sometimes I kind of take a few days where I'm doing something else and I don't look at the weather over the Pacific, which is really one of my favorite places. But this is from the 23rd to about now, so it's last week, right?
Last Friday through today, yep.
Last Friday through today. It's been a fairly active period in the Northeast Pacific. I'd say Northeast, including all the way to the dateline. You'll see near the end of this period, a couple of days from now, big monster storm gets itself organized right over the southern Bering Sea. But prior to that, several individually, I'd say modest scale cyclones. Here's one that emigrated southward from there, and here's the other one that was sitting off the Pacific Northwest coast. Have been, populating the high latitude Northeast Pacific for much of the week. So now we're back to the beginning of the week. So some cold air. Here's cyclone number 1 along the Aleutian chain, Kodiak Island. Here's cyclone number 2, fairly small, but in the cold air. This one never really got together. It had its pocket of cold air to begin with. And then here's another of the big cyclones that breaks over the eastern Bering Sea, and something is going to slide southward out of this that is occupying some of the attention today. So it's been really, really interesting. A lot of cutoff disturbances in and around the southern part of the Gulf of Alaska. And this is now the 26th of March, so we're a few days away from the present time. Here comes the big storm. This thing finally starts to get a little bit of a cyclonic swirl to it. It's going to end up spinning around over Hawaii at the end of the period. I don't know why it stopped.
I stopped
oh, okay.
Just to give you a
second. Oh,
yeah.
So this thing's going to end up spinning around. This one's died out, and this is the next big monster cyclone at the approximately at the dateline. So a really interesting sequence over the week, and a fairly inactive period, I'd say, over this swath of the longitudes in the Eastern Pacific tropics, except for a little bit of ITCC at the beginning. No real plume action, as we've seen quite a bit in the last couple of months. Plumes to the north and northeast. So none of that happened this time. So it's almost as if one gets the impression that I don't know what the jet structure looks like, but my guess would be the jet is just a little bit more extended and maybe revved up, and everything that's happening extratropically is confined to the high latitude, and everything tropical is confined to the south of the jet.
Well, that's kind of a plume right there in the middle that was coming up.
Yeah, that's the first one.
Yeah,
it's the only one this week, which is kind of interesting. And I'm pretty sure that had something to do with the close connection or close approach of one of these disturbances in the extratropics. But by and large, a fairly empty period for plume activity. And I still, I don't know, Greg, maybe I don't know what the climatology is in these certain longitude bands in the Eastern Pacific. When are they most common? Has anybody looked at that?
Well, yeah.
You and John did some work on these, but I don't know if it was a climate work.
Yeah, well, with Lindsay and all, that's what we were looking at. And it's certainly an annual or year-long cycle. There's also a 6-month cycle going from hemisphere to hemisphere. But on top of that, it's just random almost. And that there's the 45-day cycle of plumes, which is the MJO, we think. But after that, it's random. Some years have bursts, and other years it just never plume.
Yeah.
And I don't know why there's that intermittency to it.
Yeah.
There is.
Because I'm interested in the transition season, from the end of winter to the beginning of spring. We're right kind of in the heart of that period right now. Yeah. And at least on the very large scale, one gets the impression that there are circumstances that can lead to a fairly stormy northern hemisphere through March and April in some years, and then a fairly placid northern hemisphere through March and April in other years. And I think that has something to do with how the orphaned tropopause polar vortices find their way out of the polar regions in certain years, and they don't find their way out, and they just kind of decay radiatively in other years. But it's something I'm still exploring. I want to see if that doesn't turn out to be true.
John, is the TPV like that? Is that related to the timing of the final breakdown of the?
I don't know that. It seems like there'd be a reasonable sort of connection there. Yeah, and when you finally take the fence out around them, they might be able to migrate farther south, but they easily just get destroyed by radiation in that case. You want them to leave.
But the thing is, we never
in a fairly potent state.
We lost the classic polar vortex early in the season, so we've had the one that was sitting over Canada, but we haven't had a real polar night jet or polar night vortex sitting up there
Yeah.
for a long time this year. So I think that's affected things.
Yeah, maybe so, yeah. It might be one of those odd years where you get either a lot of storminess in the spring because there's nothing confining things from leaving the Arctic in the wintertime. So Pete, can we go to the continental US view?
Yep.
And the current one's enough.
IR visible.
I guess let's do IR first because we'll see some things from early this morning.
But I should also mention right now, one thing that's happening right now, it's pretty spectacular. There's a lot of plumes going toward the South Pole.
Is that right?
Yeah, they're shooting out that way. There's not many going forward in the northern hemisphere, but they're all over the place in the south.
So let me ask you this. When does the period of increased activity begin for southern hemisphere plumes? And how variable is it from year to year?
I think it's February, March typically
Okay.
where it starts ramping up.
Yeah.
But it's really most strong probably in the months of August.
Oh, is that in the southern hemisphere?
Yeah, in the southern
Oh,
hemisphere.
wow. Okay.
Because that's
That's their,
winter.
let's see, that's the beginning, that's the end of their winter. That's their spring, right?
Yeah, well, it's late in their winter.
Yeah, yeah, sort of like we're
But-
talking about here in the north.
But that's when they get going, when they have lots of velocity waves.
Mhm.
There's a big wave number 5 going out all the time
Mm.
in the southern hemisphere. It's in the summer, in our summer,
Yeah.
their winter. And those are touching a lot of plumes off.
So here's our, this is a 6-hour loop, right? 6-hour loop over the continental United States and adjacent waters. And this is really the most interesting feature on the map today, this convective bloom in Oklahoma, Kansas, and southwest Missouri. Really, really interesting. You'll see in the revamped lightning page in just a minute that people show us some pretty nice lightning. I'm interested in the northward build of this thing. So it starts out in the corner of the tri-state area and then builds toward, Omaha. And fairly rapidly along the Missouri River. I think I stuck a peek. There's a lot of lightning that's kind of bloomed in the last couple of hours
We
on
can
that
zoom in on
portion.
that if you want, we could Conus loop or Midwest.
No, that's is good enough for now. We can look at that in a minute. So whether or not it makes it any further northward and with what it might be associated with a loft are kind of interesting questions to me. I want to see what's going on there. This disturbance here, let me point out Bermuda. I'm trying to find the motionless green spot. It's about right here. I don't know exactly where it is. But this is where Bermuda is, and this disturbance has very obvious extratropical type cloud distribution, but I don't know, maybe a month or so from now, it starts to be somewhat ambiguous whether this is tropical or extratropical, but not, I think, in late March. That's pretty obviously extratropical. But it starts to have that interesting, apparently convective building on both sides of the circulation center, which is one of those things that sometimes differentiates the tropical from the extratropical storms in that weird region of the world. Very cold, but far north. We're going to have cold air poised to make it southward, and I don't think it really does. It gets colder on Saturday and Sunday, we'll see in the forecast, but after that, it just pools over the western part of the Hudson Bay and fairly well sits there for about 8 days, but that's, I don't know, you feel like a mouse under the scope of a cat when you're in that position, because it could get cold here fast, but I don't think it's going to. Okay, oh, look at this. I didn't see this before. All these little eddies on the Gulf Stream, or the northern branch of the northern edge of it, that you can see kind of out through the low-level stratus clouds. Really nice. A lot of structure in there. Very cold shelf water off New England and very warm in the south. Look at that structure right in there. Very small scale structure. Beautiful. Okay, can we take a look at the radar before we go to the upper level charts? So yeah, this line's getting more and more interesting. Maybe we'll stop at the beginning, Peter. Yeah, so at the beginning, it was mostly confined to this Kansas-Oklahoma border. A lot of pretty intense cells, a few that were strayed to the north and west. And if we step through instead of animate, you'll see they kind of grow through the state of Kansas, isolated, heavily convective cells. I don't know if they're supercells. I don't know enough to say. I wouldn't want to put myself out there. But they seem to get a little bit better organized in this line to the west of Kansas City, and then keep on moving in their intensity further and further north into southeastern Nebraska. Well, actually, they start to decay a little bit near the end, so it's short-lived, but there's something interesting going on along this line. The southern one decays, evidently, as it moves into Arkansas, and there's not too much happening on that as there was earlier, but this one gets a little bit stronger, almost gets organized, and it's right along the Missouri River in Kansas and Nebraska. So interesting, but only the beginning, hopefully, of the season that will have other interesting structures in it too. Hopefully, it gets hurt there. Here's some widespread rain. I was in State College for 2 days this week, and it was perfectly cloudless, which apparently never happens on consecutive days in State College, Pennsylvania. And as soon as I leave, it's raining there today. So I feel pretty good about that. I avoided that. When I was in England the week before, it didn't rain anywhere. It was sunny every day. So I've just been the sun king everywhere I've been lately. And then this precipitation is moving into western New England, and it'll be off the coast during the day today.
You are a sun dog, so.
Yeah, I didn't think of
The
that.
lead singer, so the sun king makes sense.
Yeah. So we've got precipitation in the eastern part of the United States, some convective precipitation along the Missouri River and into Oklahoma, and that's really about it around the country today in terms of precipitation. Although, what's interesting, we even saw it in the satellite, there's an obvious cyclonic circulation centered in central Wyoming, which is kind of an odd place to see that on the satellite. You don't often see something that looks like a cyclone over the Intermountain West. But I want to see what that's connected to in the upper level charts, which I haven't even looked at today, so this will be fun to do like Christmas morning for me. So let's take a look at well, first the surface map. I want to see if there's any reports of interesting stuff going on along that squall line. So thunderstorm, light rain to the west, which is probably in the trailing stratum. Some of that precipitation is snow in the higher elevation of western Nebraska. Unbelievable, look at that. 32 degrees and snowing. And Omaha's 43 and 30, nothing's happened there yet, and the lighter rain to the north. So there must be a few places in between here that had earlier in the day at different times some pretty interesting weather. Here's a thunderstorm on the Texarkana, what's not Texarkana, but it's Oklahoma, Arkansas border, and then one on the Kansas, Missouri border. So some thunderstorms there. Most of this is just light rain and well warm enough to be rain everywhere. It's in the mid-50s. It's even 40 degrees in Caribou. So there's no snow anywhere in that precipitation. And it's very warm, but relatively dry in the coastal South Atlantic, where it's 71 over 40 at that town.
Howard'sville?
No, what the heck is this one?
Wilmington.
Wilmington, yeah, Wilmington, North Carolina. They often have the dew point above 80 degrees a few times every year, so I like to look at them. Today, 40, 71 over 40, that's a pretty nice day. And that's uniformly the case across the Carolinas and most of Georgia. The high dew points really don't intrude, and even here they intrude only modestly. 61 dew point in Miami is not too hard to take. I think that might be about as high as they get. There's a few in the mid-60s around Houston and College Station, but other than that, dew points are not really exceeding 60. So a pretty nice late March day across much of the country, and very warm and of course dry in the western U.S. Okay, so let's take a look at the upper level charts where we might get some idea of why it's snowing in some of the higher elevation in western Montana. Yeah, the super pizza, the obvious choice. So here's our 500 millibar map from this morning. And there is a pretty nice little trough feature across the border of Nevada, Utah, arguably Utah, Colorado. And it's characterized by a pretty substantial horizontal temperature gradient, almost minus 30 on the cold side. And then here we're in the mid-minus teens. So took a pencil to this yourself, you might draw that a little bit more intensely than it's drawn by the computer, but that's a pretty decent upper level frontal structure. Maybe it's somewhat less than the most intense you'd ever see, but it's late March. And so downstream of this feature, I presume there'll be a 300 millibar jet at this location. There's asset in the exit region, and that's helping to carve out perhaps a little bit of this troughiness that's over the Great Salt Lake region. Underneath the big ridge on the west coast, which I think was evident watching some of the cloud features from the satellite. It was going over that big hump along the British Columbia and Yukon Territory coast.
That little negatively tilted shortwave in western Colorado and in Wyoming.
Yeah, this one here, yeah.
That might be amplifying to some extent because of the negative tilt, and that's helping force out that circulation rather than Wyoming.
Yeah, could be. That's a pretty nice region of deceleration and change in curvature. So there's a lot of upper level divergence right in this region. And that's right where we see the center of the vortex in the satellite. And then very, very close to minus 42 on the eastern shore of Hudson Bay on March 29th. That's downright cold. So this air is pristine winter type cold, maybe fractionally milder than that, but not much. And it's poised to strike in the northern United States. The question is whether or not there'll be a disturbance in this northerly or northwesterly flow that will actually enable it to do so. So that's the threat for the weekend. And it's prompted a really weird set of forecast descriptions when you look at the forecast. Highs maybe around 45 on Saturday, I think, or something like that, but a chance of snow Saturday night or something weird like. It's really weird if you look at it. I might have the numbers wrong, but it's very strange. But not ridiculous because we're so close to this cold air. So let's go to 300 and see what the jet structure looks like. And here's the jet we imagine had to be there with the strong baritonicity evident at 500 millibars. Almost no baritonicity at 300. So this is the tropopause, I would guess, right there. And it's immediately down shear of this, or downstream of this shear and curve flow that we see that nice circulation in a somewhat unusual spot over northern Wyoming. And then on the western side of this broad scale trough that's occupying much of eastern 2/3 of Canada is a pretty strong jet stream. And this usually means you take the trough out a little bit in this location. So that slides a little bit, the trough axis extends itself a little bit to the south and west here over Lake Winnipeg. And that puts us in a little bit better position to feel some of that cold air. So we may be in line to see a change here. I think that's borne out in the forecast. So let's see what it looks like at 850 feet. So at 850, in response to that jet feature that we saw in the northwesterly flow, there's a little bit of a perturbation geopotential height minimum that's distorted the thermal field in the lower troposphere. So that's a nice little cyclone getting itself put together just to the northeast of Lake Winnipeg. Most likely that slides in this kind of fashion. Maybe we see some cloudiness from it during the day tomorrow. We certainly see some cold air advection from it later in the day on Saturday. I think there's no way we won't see that. And then after that, there doesn't appear to be anything else that's yet developed in that northwesterly flow. And in fact, in the lower troposphere, the gradient of temperature is fairly weak in a spot where it was fairly large at 500 millibars. So this might be a largely upper level disturbance after this thing comes through early in the weekend, or mid-weekend perhaps. We'll see what it looks like in the forecast. Unsettled structures out to the west are not well put together structures out to the west. Even this cyclone here that today is the one that's spinning off the coast north of Hawaii doesn't seem to move very much. And there's nothing particularly well organized or well structured right along the west coast either. Nor along the east coast, just a strong southwesterly jet. Okay. So let's see. What do you want to do next? I guess
I know what I want to just write it down.
Okay.
Or what we were going to look at one point. Here, the Mississippi River Basin.
Oh, you mentioned that.
Yeah, I don't know how well it'll show up if it's cloudy today. Let's see, this is probably. In here, yeah, it's cloudy. Never mind.
But look at all
Well,
this.
you can kind of see it in here.
You see a lot of jets, contrails. Look at
Yeah,
that.
oh yeah, down here,
All going to where, Miami or Atlanta?
I guess, yeah.
Probably coming back from spring break.
Oh, yeah, that's probably right, yeah. And look at, this is really nice. I'm glad you did this. Look at how the cumulus congestus just builds right over the peninsula. It's just beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. And there's the line right along the coast that stays cloud-free. Boy, that is like clockwork. The whole state is covered by stratocumulus, except for Okeechobee, which is just too cold. Nothing happens downwind of Okeechobee. It stays clear there. That's really neat. And I think this is where we saw dew points in the 60s. And so you see there's a northern limit to that. You're not going to really get that in Georgia, even in Alabama, Mississippi, because the dew points aren't high enough.
You can sort of see the floodplain down through here if you look, squint through the clouds. Right in here.
Yeah, I see a little bit of it there. It'll be better on a clear day.
Yeah.
I'll be able to see it better. That's neat. Okay, I guess we'll go to the forecast. There's always weird stuff that blows off of the Yucatan, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
What the heck keeps
This
this
little-
thing coherent?
This little vortex.
Oh,
down up
yeah,
here.
son of a gun.
It's
It's stratocumulus.
It's like,
Very nice.
This thing got closed circulation.
I know, yeah.
fun with Ghost 16.
Well, now that we're doing this, do we have a similar thing off of the Gulf of California? Because you sometimes see those really cool vortices off in Santa.
Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna be light for long enough, we can look. Because it's, let's see, that would be probably this one.
Nothing obvious. Usually it's right in this region here to get stratified. You get some really nice structures there. Okay.
Interesting banding, but not
Yeah.
nothing like really.
All right, let's go to the forecast, and I think we're going to use our own maps instead of the stuff Michael often shows. change things up a little
I
bit.
gotta update my web pages sometime. I'll do
Let's
this
see.
on Python too sometime.
We'll do the 12Z on the 104 grid. Let's start with the 6-hour forecast at sea level, so we know where we are. And this is our current situation, or close to it, as it's part of the forecast. So here's some of that convective element that moved across the Oklahoma to Arkansas border, and then the stuff that poked up from Kansas into Nebraska. It does seem to be tied to a developing cyclone on the New Mexico-Colorado border. Remember, that's kind of in that same exit region of that jet, although it's on the south side of the exit region. So this has got a lee side component that seems to be fighting what should be a little bit of subsidence in that location, provided by the wave scale. The synoptic scale that is flow over the terrain is helping to produce a little bit of a lee side feature. The lee side feature that pokes into central Colorado and into southern Wyoming is certainly sustained and fortified by the ascent that's going on in the exit region of that cyclonically curved jet. So I think we'll see a cyclone probably look a little more intense as time goes on the northern edge of this inverted trough, not the southern one. That would be my guess. Again, not having looked at anything today. And then we have pretty low thickness. This is the 510 thickness line all the way down into the northern part of Lake Winnipeg, the southern part of Hudson Bay. It's not that far away. This is a little cyclone, the manifestation of which we saw at 850 at the 12Z. This is a little bit further ahead in time, but that's where we saw that cyclone. It's only 1,012 millibars, but it has a nice thermal structure. A little bit of warm advection ahead, even more pronounced cold advection on its backside. And so when this thing slides to the east and southeast, as it most likely will, we'll find ourselves in the cold air advection region within a certain number of hours, and that will cool us down from an already, not particularly warm day, but a nice day outside. Sunny, not too much wind, feels pretty good outside. And there's our cyclone that we saw spinning north of Hawaii. It's kind of sitting around 1,005, nothing to write home about, but a pretty decent structure. Okay, so let's take a look at 500 millibars at the same time. And here's the upper vorticity feature associated with the storm that's likely to take better shape in southern Wyoming, northern Colorado. Vortex, there's a combination of both shear and curvature at exactly this location. That's why it's the large vorticity maximum, right on the southern border of Utah with Arizona. And that's the feature of interest for us for the next day. So we'll kind of trace that through in time. Here's another feature, though, of interest, which is, of course, upstream of the position of our weak cyclone on the border of Ontario with Saskatchewan, or Manitoba. And so we have a cyclone that's getting itself put together there. And other than that, not a lot of obviously strong activity anywhere in this part of the northern hemisphere. So let's go to 18 hours into the forecast. Sorry, you made a good guess there, but
Surface or
let's go to 500 first. So here's 500 for midnight tonight. Here comes the wave from the north, and it's now over the northern northern half of Minnesota. And so cold convection certainly trailing behind in the lower troposphere. We'll see that in just a minute. And that's going to be on our doorstep. Meanwhile, we have this vortex strip tied to the structure that we saw earlier in the day over the Nevada-Utah area. It's moving eastward and down sheer of that location over Kansas and southern Nebraska. We're probably going to see something developing. So we may have independent cyclone disturbances in these two different locations. And which one becomes the predominant weather producer for us is maybe the question of the weekend. So this is valid midnight tonight. Let's see what the thermal structure underneath it looks like at 850. And so we have a pretty interesting structure here, actually, don't we? We have a cyclone that's trying to get itself together in the lower troposphere over Kansas and maybe northwestern Missouri. That's indicated by this slight geopotential height trough. Then there's that old geopotential height trough we saw even in the analyses this morning, so only 18 hours prior to this, that had a very strong cold air advection back behind it, not so strong warm advection ahead of it. That characteristic is maintained. And so as this thing slides across the lakes, very strong cold advection has already invaded the arrowhead of Minnesota and maybe as far south as Superior by the time we get to midnight tonight. There's weaker cold advection to the south and east, and that's us. So we're not getting much colder at first, but I think we have a chance to get considerably colder as we move into that regime. My guess, looking at these two structures, this is a barophonic structure too across Kansas and Missouri. This one's got a little more potency to it. Maybe it'll have an easier time forming a cyclone than this one to the south. So let's see what it looks like at sea level. It's really kind of interesting setup. Wow, just the opposite. The minimum in sea level pressure is along the trailing cold front of that, or the baroclinic zone out ahead of this upper wave. And we do still have really strong cold advection associated with this weakening wave over western Lake Superior. So strong cold advection, including over us in the lower troposphere, yet precipitation just beginning to invade tonight. Yeah, tonight around midnight over the southern and southeastern counties of the state, more intensely to the south. 540 thickness line for those interested is right north of us by this time. So that's where the mix maybe of rain and snow comes in as the precipitation moves inward. So we don't have a really substantial sea level pressure to the north, a minimum to the north. We have a developing one to the south, which is weak, but not as weak. So let's go 12 hours ahead of this. The midday on Saturday, on which time this upper trough feature is kind of the axis of it is just about at our longitude, come right through us. And this feature still has this kind of mostly long linear shape indicative of it being mostly a shear feature, and then with a curvature head over Joplin, Missouri. And this looks like it's going to be a little bit strong PVA across from the positive to the local negative. Why there's a negative there is interesting. Maybe it's convected. And so somewhere over central Missouri, maybe there'll be some development. This development should remain weak and unpronounced. That would be my guess. Let's see what it looks like yet. Now, before we do, Pete, I just want to point out, even though it's March 30th, there's nothing in between the Beaufort Sea all the way down to Madison on Saturday morning. So it's going to be very strong northerly flow at upper levels. Let's see what it looks like at 8:50. Same thing. So the flow is pretty much unadulterated all the way from the archipelago straight down into the Great Lakes, the western Great Lakes region. And we've cooled off considerably as a consequence. So here's really strong cold advection at 8:50. Temperatures back in here in the -18 range. We started the day today in the -4 to -6 range. So that's going to be a big temperature change. And it'll be reflected in temperatures at the ground to some extent. Here's the maybe some sort of combined trophiness with a minimum in geopotential height that might be residual of what was there already before. Doesn't seem like there's any obvious secondary cyclone, just a little hint, secondary minimum in geopotential height there. Very intense baroclinic zone along which any of that PVA is occurring up to the north into Illinois. It's just not enough to overcome the deformation along the front and produce its own little cyclone. So we got a fairly modest cyclone characterized by a really intense baroclinicity, and that's going to make it cold over much of the central plains of the United States watching the Sweet 16 tomorrow. Gonzaga won, so of course Dan's probably excited. But
Be the Elite Eight by tomorrow.
yeah,
We're in the Sweet 16.
that's right.
Gonzaga's my champ, so.
Well, I hope for Dan's sake they get there, but they always seem to choke on some chunk. It's just a matter of, are they going to do it this time?
Who do you
Michigan coughed up a hairball last night. Man, that was a terrible.
have? Who's your champion?
Michigan State.
Yeah.
Cassius Winston.
Brewers won yesterday.
Yeah, they
Opening
did.
day.
Dramatic fashion.
Yeah.
And I'm going on Sunday. At about this time, I'll be thinking about the Brewer game the following day. Glad there's a roof.
Yeah.
So let's go to the surface map. What does it look like at 30 hours at the surface? Wow, this thing is no cyclone really to speak of. It's so weak, 1,004, a little bit further to the north than I expected. That's where the main development's going on, if you can call it that. Precipitation is well to our south and east by this time, but we are still under some really substantial cold advection. So Saturday's going to be a cold day. I think that we won't get very much precipitation, and there is a chance that some of it will follow snow. And the sun will come out, but the sun will be heating the ground while there's cold advection aloft. It's going to destabilize. We'll probably have cumulus clouds all day long. They might not precipitate, but it'll probably be a cloudy day. But pretty chilly day, too, comparatively to the last couple, as this whole complex moves further and further to the east. So let's go 12 hours further and take a look at Saturday night into Sunday morning, by which time the southern feature in the vorticity is very weak. The only thing that still remains is a now linear feature at a higher latitude. And this is such a sharply curved flow, but on both the upstream and more importantly the downstream side, the flow is perfectly straight. So you're going to get a little bit of ascent downstream of that. That's it. It's not going to be really widespread and conducive to substantial development. Another little wave emerges in the analysis, or the forecast, I should say, over the Northwest Territories, and that's in northwesterly flow. This thing has a chance to develop and maybe reinvigorate the cold snap that is going to apparently pollute the last few days of March for us. So let's see what it looks like at 8:50.
And just to point out that
Oh, yeah.
the East Pacific is just a mess.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Comical.
This has got, there's no flow at all at 500 millibars in the entire Gulf of Alaska. There's a little wave to the south or to the north of Hawaii, and then there's this broad trough at around the date line, but it really does look at the latitude, doesn't it? Yeah. I think overall it's been a bad winter in the Eastern Pacific. It hasn't been exciting. There haven't been 960 millibar lows. There haven't been anything like that.
But there's been an unusual amount of activity in the Southern Pacific, in the southern.
Is that right?
So it's flipped over this year. For some
Yeah.
reason, the Southern Pacific was even pretty active in their summer season.
Yeah.
So,
You know, I get excited about the Eastern Pacific as early as mid-October, as two of you can attest, being former TAs for me in 452. It gets really exciting some years. And then all the way through the middle of March, from October to March, it's been boring, with almost no exception. Well, you play the cards you're dealt, I guess. So let's see what we get at 850. I'm worried about this for mid to early part of the following week. So, just mostly a cyclone-less baroclinic zone. That doesn't mean it's not related to substantial weather. Big impacts, very cold over the western and central Great Lakes states Saturday night. It's going to be really cold. Nobody's going to like it. And the precipitation will all be to the east. And we've got this feature up here to watch out for, and maybe that gives another second shot of cold air. Broadly speaking, at 850, it's uniformly cold, as it is in Madison, all the way up to the archipelago, with this exception for further north. So maybe it isn't so bad if there's little disturbances that trickle along that northwesterly flow upstream side of the trough axis. It's just not going to bring any colder air, it just won't allow warmer air to move in. So let's see what it looks like at sea level. 1,035, look at this, low 1,021, accurate, that's what it is, but that would be as low you'll ever see. And here's the precipitation along the extended baroclinic zone. Probably a few places it's fairly intense, maybe convective in a couple of places. There's no substantial cyclone development over this whole period of time. Unsurprising, everything's linear, nothing's really isotropic. It's hard to form a cyclone under that geometry. And here's our next disturbance. It's not very strong, it even doesn't even have, let's see, that's 1,012. 1,016, so maybe 1,012 minimum right in that location. It's going to have a difficult time being a really substantial threat for us moving into the early part of next week. So let's, for the fun of it, let's go 24 hours ahead from that time at sea level. See what we get. So there's the progress of our next disturbance. It's now in the Northwest Territories. We have this little 1,021. It hasn't changed its intensity at all. It's kind of slid southeastward and maybe imposed a little bit of warm advection over us, but this is still the 540 thickness line, this solid one right here. So chilly as we go into the first day of April, April Fool's Day, or maybe President's Day. Well, that's another thing. We have a fool for a president. Let's go 24 hours in advance. He actually said it's a danger to worry about wind, and he knows a lot about wind, he says. He doesn't even realize that he's satirizing himself. He doesn't even realize it. 997, unfortunately getting itself cut off on the southwestern shore of Hudson Bay. I think it poses no substantial threat for us for a renewed cold air advection. Let's see if I'm right. Let's keep going. I don't know. Sitting in the same spot. Here comes the, look at this, 494 thicknesses. There's really cold air there. We'll go to 850 in just a second. That's poised by midweek to be just to our north. Just weak temperature advection, weak cold advection, but I don't think we get into the middle of that. Look at this beautiful low-level deformation zone. It's going to really tighten this baroclinic zone up. In fact, it's already responding to the tightening with snow in central Saskatchewan in the forecast for Tuesday night. One more time, Pete. Let's see what it looks like Thursday. Or Wednesday at midnight. Oh boy, that's interesting. How do we get there? We got to go to 12 hours in between. You got to do all the math for the 1 hour. So here's the baroclinic zone. This thing is frontogenetically active. There's no doubt about that. But moisture stopped, I guess. Maybe it picks up a little bit off the lake. I don't think it really is, but it's possible at a different time of year. Then we have something emerging out of the Intermountain West with another region of frontogenetic activity and an open gate to some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. So that's probably the combination. Looking at this, let's go to 500 millimeters and just see what we get there. As you can see,
End of the world.
how about 700? You know, they're kind of messy with vertical motion. But you can see the broad upper trough that's in the vicinity of the central Rockies, both in New Mexico, Colorado. So downstream of that is where we're starting to get this development, and that development is able to tap, it seems, some of the water vapor from the western Gulf of Mexico. Really intense updraft is indicated in the forecast vertical motions right over the Mississippi River all the way into west central Minnesota. So that is interesting. How about 850? We actually got to do the whole thing. What's going on here?
How was that 126?
126, yeah. Not really obvious that that's a low-level tropospheric temperature induction feature, so that's interesting. It's a sharply curved part of the flow at upper levels. So that's really interesting. An interesting
Cold
day.
air still up here.
Yeah, and there's the cold air, right? So and this is the active chronogenetic band, I think. That's really quite cold, way colder than anything at the pole. That's the coldest air in the Western Hemisphere for sure. So I guess we'll have to go 12 hours more and see what happens to that. So this is midnight Wednesday. Did we already do midnight Wednesday? I think we did.
A lot, not at 8:50.
Oh, okay, yeah, not at 8:50. So
Or a surface edge.
it's a really cold northwestern Canada for the beginning of April. Question is, boy, we're not that far away from disaster, but as it is, we're in a pretty nice situation. +4 to +5 at 850, that's pretty nice. Something like 12 or so at the ground, 55. It's not bad in southwesterly flow, but something's lurking, sort of Damocles. Let's see if a day further into the future, if we see any more movement of that. Did it click?
Yeah, it's waiting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not really moving anywhere, is it? That pool of cold air is sitting fairly stationary. It's getting itself underneath the upper trough. So maybe it's got no chance of ruining our first week of April. So I guess I would say that. I think we have a pretty chilly tomorrow, especially tomorrow night into Sunday. Maybe there'll be some rain mixed with snow, although the precipitation chances to me seem to be fairly small for this thing. Different from what was talked about earlier in the week, and it's changed in the forecast. And then the early part of the week is a recovery from the chill of the weekend with another potential cool down around Wednesday, but then Thursday warms back up with maybe some precipitation in southwesterly flow, at least clouds. And all the while, we're not that far away from being really miserably cold, but it looks like it won't get. So that's what it looks like to me.
Possible we have an actual spring.
Maybe we'll have a spring.
Now that I said that, probably.
You know, I mean, really, well, let's take account of this. We had a huge snow cover, and it's now melted at a fairly reasonable rate, at least in Madison. I know surrounding towns have had some trouble. And the ground, you walk on the ground now, it's a little soggy. It probably won't be by the end of the weekend. And so maybe we don't even have mud this spring, which would be remarkable if that's true. Because you shouldn't have expected that. You should have expected a really muddy, ugly spring. And so far, it doesn't look like that. So yeah, maybe we're about to turn the corner. Could be. Hope that's true. But don't forget about April 19th or 18th last year. That was a big snowstorm. Maybe something similar. Not evident in the current frogs. So I hope
So what's the final totals on snow?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Let's see if Ed updated.
Yeah, if he hasn't updated, it hasn't snowed in a while, so.
Well,
I would guess it's
maybe
somewhere
we're
in
in
the
the
low
verge of some
50s.
kind of record, and we should be hoping for snow.
Yeah, I don't know. We couldn't have a record for the season because we had such a miserable December and half of January, but I think we ended up with probably something in the low 50s.
I think we're above normal for the season.
Yeah, I think so too.
Much above.
Maybe a little snow.
Yeah.
Oh, we're at 54 point something, yep. So that's well above normal. And the normal, well, not well above, but pretty decently above, 4 inches above, so less than 10% above.
In contrast, the normal for Denver is 68.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
This was a good one. It all happened after January
Short, yeah.
10th or something. Nothing happened until then, and then boom, it was awesome. Good one. Go down to a good one. All right, so we'll see everybody next Friday. Thank you, Pete, for driving.